I have a very unique perspective when it comes to playing mouse and keyboard in Call of Duty because I'm one of the very few people who can say they've put tons of hours in both inputs and played at a high level and dropped 30+ kill games on both inputs. So I better understand the differences, but also the strengths and weaknesses of each input. In this video, I'm going to be breaking down 3 main components to help you get better at Call of Duty, specifically Warzone. First, your settings, then gameplay specific tips and strategies for playing on mouse and keyboard, and lastly, aim training. Before we cover in-game settings, I need to quickly explain DPI, or dots per inch. And simply speaking, DPI is your sensitivity outside of the game, like in your Windows operating system. Your DPI is then multiplied by your in-game sensitivity to get your eDPI, or effective DPI. And this is ultimately what your sensitivity is going to be when you're playing the game. Now the question is there a better DPI, or what is the best one? And the answer is it doesn't really matter. However, if you get into the nitty-gritty of it, people will say that playing at higher DPIs should result in a faster kind of response rate of your mouse. And so ideally, I would typically recommend you don't go any lower than 800, but 1600 tends to be a great DPI where you're getting kind of the biggest benefit of that fast response. And it's important to understand how these things work together, because an example is you can have totally different DPIs and in-game sensitivities, but you can end up having the same sensitivity at the end of the day. So what I mean by that is you could take someone that has a, let's say 1600 DPI, and they play with an in-game sense of 2. So if you time those together, that is 3200. Versus someone who's only on 800 DPI, but an in-game sense of 4, well, that also equals 3200 eDPI. Therefore, in-game, they would be playing at the same sensitivity. And then the next question is, well, is there a best sensitivity? What should I play at? And the answer is, it depends. There's no magical best one. This depends on a lot of different factors. Things like, are you more of a wrist aimer? Are you more of an arm aimer? Also, how much desk space do you have? But I would go to bet, I would put my money on it, that the majority of you guys watching this video are probably playing at too fast or too high of a sensitivity compared to when we look at some of the top mouse and key players in the game. So as an example, Metaphor, one of the best mouse keyboard players in the entire game, he does play at the highest DPI on this entire list. His in-game sense is kind of in the middle to actually kind of on the lower side since he plays on the higher DPI. And his effective DPI at first glance is one of the faster ones here. It's a pretty fast sensitivity. However, we can add to this and things get a little bit more complicated here when we factor in things like having an ADS multiplier. So he plays with actually different ones per zoom, but kind of on average, it's around this 0.45 number. And so that means when he aims his gun, his sensitivity basically cuts in half. And so his ADS eDPI is actually on the slower side compared to a lot of these other players here. Now there are benefits and kind of pros and cons of playing with a lower ADS multiplier versus playing with and keeping that at kind of a 1. So me personally, I play with an ADS multiplier of 1, and the benefit to that is that my hipfire sense and my aiming sense, they are equal. So I can only have to kind of learn one sensitivity. It's not like I have to change and be like, oh, my sense is getting slower when I aim this gun. However, the benefit of something of like what Metaphor does is that it's extremely easy for when he's not aiming to 180 flick or even 360 and very rapidly change directions. But when he aims his gun, his sense becomes much slower, allowing him to have more room to adjust his aim and make those very fine precision movements. So honestly, this is something you're gonna have to play around with, but I will say if you're someone that enjoys aim training and playing on things like Aimlab or Kovac, I do think playing with a ADS multiplier of 1 tends to be a little bit easier for practicing purposes, because then you don't have to worry about applying that ADS sense, and you're just practicing one sensitivity to be good at hipfire and to be good at your aiming, because your hipfire sense is very important for making those initial flicks. So what I'd recommend is, set your DPI to wherever it needs to be or whatever you currently are, and then figure out what your eDPI is and kind of see where you are. Now, if you are really, really high, which a lot of you might be, and you're like, 10,000 plus eDPI, I'm not saying you have to make a change. However, I do think if you are struggling with your aim and you want to get better, it would be a good idea to then come down and kind of be at one of the higher ranges of these. So actually the highest sense on here is Pieman. He plays pretty high eDPI and ADS eDPI, but he is an insanely good sniper, especially, and just good player in general. But then there's other people. So example, Nicole plays a super low sense, especially with his ADS, but he is a top 250 Warzone ranked player, and he's hanging in there with the best controller players. He won the solo YOLO, I believe, a year or two ago. And so someone like that, there is the benefit of playing at those ultra low cents, but you can only do that if you can teach yourself how to arm aim and you have the desk space to do so. One other thing I do want to quickly touch on before we jump into settings is your equipment. So as far as kind of like your mouse and keyboard, mouse pad goes, at the end of the day, just having any decent gaming mouse that is ideally wireless is going to be best. Now you can totally use a wired one. Just make sure that that wire is set up out of the way where that wire is not going to be dragging and interfering with you moving around. If you play low sense, it's very hard to play with a wired mouse because it often gets in the way. I am playing with a Final Mouse 10Z edition. This is a very high-end, very lightweight mouse. You do not need this. Like, you will be perfectly fine to go get like a $20 to $50 gaming mouse, like a Logitech, Corsair, Razer, or whatever out there. You will be just fine. And then as far as keyboard goes, there's also nothing magical here. Just getting any basic mechanical type keyboard is going to be great. And then I do play with a 10 keyless, meaning it's not going to have like the extra number pad and stuff on the right. So it makes it a little bit smaller. They also make 60% keyboards that are even smaller than this if you are tight on desk space so that you have more mouse pad. As far as your mouse pad goes, I have a very large mouse pad. This is the Lethal Gaming Gear Saturn. This is a control pad. So there are control pads and there are speed pads, and there's also kind of ones in the middle. I prefer control pads, and I feel like a lot of the high-end players tend to play control pads. They have a little bit more friction than a speed pad, and it's just a little bit easier to kind of slow down your mouse and make those fine-tune adjustments. However, speed pads, they are a lot of fun to play on because they're super low friction, so you can make super fast flicks and things like that. But again, this really just depends person to person, and you're going to adapt and get used to whatever equipment you are using. All right, so let's jump actually into in-game settings. So again, this is going to depend on where you are. I am 1.77 here. As far as the additional here is, I do like to turn my ground vehicles and air vehicles multiplier down quite a bit because otherwise the sense feels absurdly fast. But again, that is personal preference. We discussed ADS multiplier already. I think a general good range is anywhere from about 0.6 to 1. But again, people like Metaphor, they play even lower, so you can play around with that as well. The focus is when you are holding your breath with a sniper, you can turn your sense down. I leave mine at 1 again. Let's say you have this at 0.5, this will also kind of default to 0.5. It will default to whatever your ADS sense is, and this will make it even slower based off that. Look conversion, you want to make sure that is on standard unless you like that opposite kind of up is down, down is up type thing. Leave these ones off. Mouse advanced settings here. So some players do play with this on, and what they will do is they will have different sensitivities per zoom scope. Typically, people will have lower sensitivities for their 1x and low zooms, and as they get higher, they will slightly increase these. So Metaphor, I know, does this, and this is just so that when you have a super high zoom scope, you can still move and adjust because that kind of scope is going to naturally slow things down for you. As far as ADS sensitivity transition timing goes, this is how your ADS multiplier takes effect as you zoom the gun in. I think gradual is probably the best option here. Basically what this does is meaning as you're zooming that gun in, your ADS sensitivity multiplier is slowly applying until the gun is fully zoomed in. ADS sensitivity type, now this is a very confusing one to explain. I'll do my best here. When we go back to the chart here, I don't have this information on everybody, but it seems like most people tend to play on relative. However, Metaphor is on legacy. So what legacy versus relative is doing is when you are zooming in on your gun, you're going to see that your field of view changes some, where the outside of my screen, you see how it zooms in. Even though I'm on 120 field of view affected, which is meant to keep things out, and even with an iron sight gun, it's still going to adjust. Relative is going to adjust based on what your monitor distant coefficient is. And this is basically taking into account the size and ratio of your monitor. And relative is trying to make it so that no matter what your zoom level is, that your sensitivity feels the same basically. Legacy, however, is going to it's going to adjust based off what your new field of view is. And so what that means is with higher zoom scopes, your sensitivity will probably feel a little bit faster. And so generally the difference that I can, to really simplify this, relative feels a little bit slower when you aim your gun in, but legacy feels faster. So I would say for me, because I play with an ADS sense multiplier of 1, relative feels like I still slow my ADS sense down a little bit when I aim in, even though I don't have a multiplier. But someone like Metaphor, for example, who plays on that super low multiplier, it makes sense since he's on legacy because it's going to kind of counteract those two. At the end of the day, just pick one and stick with it. I think most people should probably be on relative, but there's nothing wrong with legacy. So now we need to explain what monitor distance coefficient does, because this is very important with that relative ADS sense type. To find this, all you need to do is know your monitor resolution. So if you're on a standard 1920 by 1080 monitor, you're gonna take the bigger number and divide it by the smaller number. So 1920 divided by 1080, and that will equal 1.78. I'm on a 2560 by 1440, so just a 2K monitor, but the same 16:9 ratio, that still equals 1.78. This will only be different if you're on like an ultra wide monitor or just a unique sized monitor. And so you'll need to take the horizontal resolution divided by the vertical resolution. Now the default for this is 1.33. And I will say, if you've been playing on 1.33 for quite a while, there's nothing wrong with leaving this the same. What this will feel like if you change this is it will make your tracking in like your wide flicks feel a little bit different when you make this change. But there are a lot of top players that still play on 1.33, even though they are on a 16:9 monitor. But if you're kind of new, you just want to kind of stick to what's probably best and kind of learn from there, then I would recommend 1.78. All right, under mouse calibration, hit show more. Make sure these first three are all at 0 or off. These are going to just lead to a lot of inconsistencies in your aiming, and we don't want to mess with them. Mouse wheel delay, I recommend just going kind of on the lower side here. This is when you're spinning your mouse wheel. It will have, this means there's a 20 millisecond delay until it will register the next input. So if you're hitting it multiple times, it reduces the chance of you kind of doing it too much. All right, now for keybinds. So I first want to say, guys, that I have some very unique and kind of unorthodox keybinds that I'm not really recommending that you copy mine. Now, because I've gotten used to it and it just feels natural to me, it works great. But like as an example, I use caps lock to reload. I don't recommend that. Some kind of small tidbits I will give out for you though, guys, is one thing that I really like doing is having my ping on something that's super easy to hit. So I use Q. This allows me to live ping very, very easily and fast while I'm shooting, and having those live pings can be useful to help kind of track in dark areas especially. I also recommend that you have a separate keybind for your crouch slide and then for your prone dive. This allows you to hit drop shots and just dive much easier than trying to hold it with the same keybind. Now, a little bit of a pro tip here is that you can actually have a dedicated slide button, and this kind of really gets rid of you accidentally dead sliding. So if you go into your movement keybinds and you hit movement advanced keybinds, this will open up and you can put a dedicated slide. So whatever you normally slide with, like you slide cancel with, set it to that. You then need to have a separate crouch slide button. So I use C personally. And so where this matters is that if I'm trying to hit slide cancels, I'm hitting my shift button, right? But I cannot hit shift. If I hit shift like I am right now, nothing happens because I'm not moving. This only does sliding. So if I need to crouch behind a wall for some reason, I have to hit that other button. But the benefit of this is that I will never accidentally get those dead slides where you crouch instead of wanting to slide. And this is very useful for movement. And this is a kind of pretty big advantage that mouse and keyboard has over controller, because controller can't do this. They can't have separate dedicated keybinds. And then also with the whole diving thing, my E is my dive or prone. And what's nice about this is that I can very easily tap and get into those drop shots. It's much easier for me to drop shot on M&K, because on controller, you have to hold the crouch button and it takes like a half second until that applies. Whereas mouse and keyboard, I can just tap really quick and I will instantly prone or dive. Now, unfortunately, they don't have a dedicated prone button. I wish they did, because then that would make drop shotting even easier. You can set a dedicated dive button though, if you want, although it's not as big of a deal. In your combat advanced keybinds, make sure that you have a dedicated switch to melee weapon here. So again, whatever this is that is comfortable for you hitting. This is just useful because you can very quickly bring our knife out. This is another small advantage of mouse and keyboard, because on controller, you have to hold melee. It can be kind of awkward. You accidentally melee. Whereas on M&K, we can get that out and we can use that to get that movement boost to kind of use in between fights for those kind of quick little movement sprint buffs. One extra little thing that you also can do is I actually have a foot pedal that is assigned to T, which is my push to talk. It just makes it easier for when I need to push to talk, but you can also use this for other things. Like you can use it for pinging or sliding, diving, whatever you want. You can assign foot pedals to specific actions if that is easier for you. All right, going over to the movement tab here. So first, sprint assist. This is going to be basically what our auto tac sprint used to be called. Now I use tactical sprint assist, which means as soon as I press the W key, I'm going to instantly get into a full tac sprint, or the fastest version. However, if you are someone that likes to use hipfire guns or especially shotguns, this can get a little bit awkward. And this is where I think just playing with it off is a great idea. Now, Call of Duty likes to have their settings laid out in just really goofy things. So if we scroll down to movement advanced settings, from here, we can then go down to tactical sprint activation, and you can set it so that it only takes one tap of one button to instantly get all the way into your tac sprint. So for me, my mouse 4 button is actually this. And so if I had it set to this, then W key is a walk, and this is great for hip firing, especially with shotguns, but then just one tap of my mouse gets me into that tac sprint. So if you want to have more control over your movement, that is a fantastic idea as well. Mantle assist, I recommend leaving off because you will just accidentally mantle things and it will get yourself killed. Crouch assist is fine. It will just auto crouch for you if you want, but this is not that important of one. Now, corner slicing, this is that kind of Rainbow Six Siege mechanic where your guy will lean out to the side. Totally personal preference here. It's not a huge advantage, but it might give you the smallest advantage as far as seeing angles a little bit better, but honestly, it's not a big deal, so it's whichever you prefer. For all your behaviors, I recommend sticking to toggle. Leave automatic airborne mantle off, parachute as off, unless you tend to splat, you might wanna leave that on. Sprint restore and slide maintain sprint, make sure these are on. This makes things like slide canceling way easier. So if I sprint and I hit slide once, if I just hold my W key, I will automatically stand back up. I'm literally hitting shift, and then just holding W, and my guy will automatically stand back up and get out of that slide cancel. It makes it way easier. Mantle cancel reload, highly recommend you turn that one off. In the movement advanced settings here, now ground and mantle I do turn on, and this makes getting through windows so much easier. Mantling is kind of a pain in the butt in this game. You will occasionally accidentally mantle things, but way less often than the other settings. So leaving this on, I think, is a good idea, but if you hate it, you can definitely leave this one off. Just getting through windows is very awkward. Slide dive activation, make sure this is on independent. This is where you have a separate button for sliding and diving. Plunging underwater, I just use free. You can also set a keybind to plunge underwater though. Sprinting door bash, you're gonna want that on. Going over to the combat tag, make sure you leave ADS behavior on hold, interact as press. Now, dedicated melee, this doesn't really matter. For me, honestly, I just put this at dedicated keybind, but because even if you have it set to hold melee, but you have a keybind, both will work. Finishing move versus body shield, that's whatever you prefer. I like to do the finishing move, but it doesn't matter. Equipment behavior, I like to do hold, but toggle is a good option here as well. So hold means I have to hold my keybind, and then when I let it go, it will then go. Versus toggle would be you hit it once, your guy holds it, you hit it again to throw it. So again, that is totally personal preference. Weapon mount activation is really personal preference. You can do ADS plus melee, which is just ADS by a corner and then, hit your melee button to mount. But I like to have a dedicated keybind. So for me, it's my Z. So when you get up to something that you can mount, bam, I do toggle so that I don't have to hit it again. You don't have to keep holding it. And that's just a lot easier personally. Combat advanced settings here. So weapon mount exit, short delay will get you unmounted a lot easier. Prioritize interact should make looting a little bit easier as well. Focus behavior, this is for when you're sniping. You can do hold or toggle. So holding means you have to hold the keybind to keep holding your breath. Toggle, you only have to hit it once. I think toggle is just a little bit easier to do. Sprint cancel reload, make sure this is off because this will make you keep canceling your reload. It's super annoying. Depleted weapon switch, this is probably want this on. I leave this off. It just means that I have to manually switch the gun when it runs out of ammo. Armor plate, make sure this is apply all. C4, I normally just do all at once. Manual fire behavior. So this is one thing, if you like to use semi-auto guns, some of them, if you put on the hold feature, it will make it where you just hold it down like an auto and it'll auto shoot for you. The downside to this though, is it will always shoot at a much slower fire rate than what you could achieve if you left it on press and you just had a good trigger finger. So generally I would say leave this on press. Akimbo behavior though, definitely recommend doing paired. If you have akimbo double guns, if you do paired, you only have to press your left trigger and it will shoot, or your left click and it will shoot both of them. Whereas independent, you have to do left and right and it can just get a little bit awkward. If you guys are looking for a full graphic settings video, I have one on my channel that a lot of people have really enjoyed. It's really helped a lot of people in terms of performance and whatnot, FPS. However, I am going to touch on this really quickly, is field of view, which is under the graphic setting under the view tab here. So for most people, I think playing on 120 is most optimal. However, if you feel like targets look too small, you absolutely can come down to maybe 100 or so. So when I come down to 100, everything is just zoomed in a little bit more, but I lose some of that peripheral vision. Versus I go back to 120, I am now wider out and I can see more on the edges. The downside of this though, is targets are going to appear smaller and farther away. However, the benefit is that my recoil appears to be less because since I'm farther away from that gun, it is changing the rate of the screen at a slower, basically. Versus if I go all the way to 60 and I shoot, it seems like the gun has way more recoil now. It doesn't, the recoil is the same, but the difference is I'm super zoomed in. So it's like shooting a gun with a 10x scope versus a 1x scope. You also will appear to move way slower with 60 FOV. But on 120, it seems like everything is way faster. Again, this is just kind of like a visual illusion. Now, ADS field of view, this is one setting that some mouse and keyboard players do really like. Most people are gonna play on affected. And what that does is when I aim my gun, my field of view doesn't really change much. But if I go to independent, it zooms in a lot. And so the benefit of this is on mouse and keyboard is those targets are going to appear a lot bigger and you can focus on where your reticle really needs to be. But again, you will have more visual recoil with this setting on. So I like to play affected. Weapon field of view, I would recommend going wide. Third person, just put it to the max, but don't really play third person. And then vehicle field of view, also go wide. For your camera settings, make sure all of these are set to off or least. One last setting I want to cover here is in the interface tab in the readability section here. If I go down to color customization, one thing I like to do is change my enemy pings to kind of this pinkish purple color. I just personally feel like I can see it a little better. It stands out a little bit more compared to just the basic red. And then also on color filter and the color filter target, if you go to 2 and then both for this, and then also crank those intensities up, it'll just make your game pop and a little bit more vibrant. Again, I go in way more depth on all of this in my graphic settings video. Then over in gameplay HUD here, would highly recommend you go down to your crosshair setting here. Now, there's a few different settings, and I believe, I don't know if this is a bug, but something changed here. I used to play with on, and with on, this would show you have the reticle, like the lines, and then you also have the center dot. However, when you start shooting your gun and hip fire, you lose your center dot. And this is annoying because it's harder to kind of visualize where that center is. However, if I go to just center dot, then you will see that the center dot never goes away even when hip firing. And so for me personally, I like to have the center dot visible just because it makes it a lot easier for when I need to hip fire. And then static is like not static. Like I think there is a bug here in one of these settings. So again, I like to go with center dot here. And then under show more, I like to make mine larger so it's a little bit easier to visualize. And then definitely I recommend changing it to a color that stands out for you. So for me, I like green, and that tends to be a pretty common color. A few other things that you can do is you can also turn down the opacity or kind of make some see-through of some of these widgets. So for example, I like to turn the metal notifications really way down so that they're not like blocking. Honestly, I'm gonna turn them down even more because they're kind of annoying. And then the score feed, which sometimes kind of pops up right in the center, I also have that turned down a good bit as well. So again, that it's not blocking your view. So now let's get into the actual kind of gameplay tips section for mouse and key. And the first one's actually gonna have to do with how we build our loadout. So first, with your SMGs, picking one that has very good iron sights, like the C9, for example, is great because we don't have aim assist or relying to kind of help keep us on track. We need to see what we are shooting. I'll give you guys a little tip to get some even crazier iron sights on the C9 specifically. So use the C9, don't use a blueprint, just use a regular gun. You're gonna have to put the gain twist barrel on, which isn't necessarily the best barrel for it, but with that, go to customize and then go to skins. If you have prestiged, you will have the Teddy's a Liar blueprint. If you put that on, then now we'll go into the firing range. This gives you this very kind of interesting iron sight where there are no side irons. So it's super clean. Unfortunately, you can't make it colored. I wish you could make it kind of a brighter color to stand out. But it is really nice. It's not a huge advantage over the C9 because it's already good anyway, but just as an option. Now, if you are going to use an SMG that doesn't have the best iron sights, but you really like the feel of the SMG, maybe a KSV, for example, it's often worth sacrificing an attachment like a barrel, grip, or stock for in optic. Usually just, whatever your standard 1X optic may be. Another thing is that on all guns, ARs or SMGs, we want to be prioritizing horizontal recoil. So you're almost always going to be running the vertical foregrip. Horizontal is just a lot harder to account for, whereas vertical is you can get a much better feel of just pulling down for that. Another thing to take note of is on controller, a lot of controller players love the infiltrator stock, which gives you that fast aim walking movement speed. This can feel a little bit awkward on mouse and key because we have to kind of counter this and adjust our aim more. So for a lot of people, you might want to stick to something like a no stock or a balance stock, or maybe even just not run a stock at all. Lastly, for SMGs and also sometimes ARs, some of these have really bad muzzle flash. And if they do, the C9 isn't too bad, but for example, like the PPSH is really bad with this. You might want to consider adding a suppressor, which will get rid of that annoying muzzle flash and all that like clutter that's on your screen. When it comes to ARs, I would almost highly recommend that you run the gain twist barrel instead of the long or reinforce so that we can maximize that bullet velocity. This is going to make the gun feel more hit scan, meaning you can just kind of aim. You don't have to worry about adjusting your aim. Now, unfortunately, 2x and 3x optics are still not great, but a lot of mouse and key players may prefer that. However, one optic that may be worth kind of trying is the RK multi-zoom. It gives you a little bit less recoil gun kick, and it is a 3x and can toggle to a 7, although 7 feels kind of weird. I don't think perks and stuff like that really change much for mouse and key besides tracker. I think tracker is a very valuable perk on mouse and key because it's going to highlight your enemies and it will make it way easier to see where they are instead of like just relying on aim assist to kind of drag towards them, and so that you can really focus on just shooting at what you need to. I will also say that sniping is of course a very strong suit of mouse and key generally, especially long range sniping. So use this to your advantage, and being kind of the team's designated sniper is a great idea. If you're looking for a great sniper support, AS Val is insanely good and insanely underrated, especially after the AK nerf. It has a better TTK, and I feel like the recoil is much easier to use with a faster fire rate. So next is going to come with more actual in-game tips, and this is going to first start with our play style. So on mouse and key, you need to recognize your strengths and your weaknesses. For mouse and key, those kind of close to mid-range fights are our biggest weaknesses. So if I go into a building like this and there is a player in here, especially if that player is on controller, this is going to be a weakness for me because they have aim assist. It's going to be very strong here. If I just miss a few shots with them moving around, that electric thing is really annoying. Wow. Then it's going to be hard. I'm going to lose some shots. So for example, let's say I know there is a player in here. On controller, I might just run in like a madness and chow and hit some movement and, kind of do my thing. If I'm playing on mouse and keyboard, I'm probably going to chow from a farther away and see if I can get him to peek in from distance here. I want to keep that fight as far as possible. Now, another thing with our loadouts that I didn't mention is running something like smoke grenades. When I throw a smoke grenade, controller players lose their aim assist. And when they do this, their aim is all over the place, but this doesn't matter to a mouse and keyboard player. So Metaphor does an amazing job of this. You throw a smoke in, you with tracker, and then you can just absolutely slam controller players. So running smokes and running also scavenger or quartermaster can be very, very good so that you can keep replenishing those smokes. And that can just be an incredibly strong combo. If you're playing as a team and let's say we're pushing into this building, it makes sense for the mouse keyboard player to kind of be either the anchor or kind of the IGL, or the in-game lead, the person who's calling the shots. Whereas if you have like a controller player on your team, you're gonna let them go, they're gonna be the ones who run in like a madman. So for example, let's say your other two teammates, they run in here and that maybe you kind of play up here, and that when the enemy pushes out, you've got the easy shot when they push out and they're forced out by your teammates, for example. Of course, as well, if you're gonna be the sniper on the team, you're gonna be the one who's always playing kind of in the back, and you're trying to keep your fights at mid to long range, which is more your strengths, and avoiding those close range fights. Now, I will say though, mouse and key does have an advantage at point blank fights typically. So, let's say there is somebody, right inside this doorway or something like that. If I go in and I try to, slide past them and create distance, that may not be beneficial because the controller player, their aim assist is gonna yoink, they're gonna get rotational. Whereas what I could do is, let's say I know he's right here, is I could slide in and drop shot right under him. Because if I get point blank, if I get within about 3 meters, they actually lose aim assist at point blank ranges, which again is going to be an advantage for us. So again, this is tricky, and this is where you have to know how to kind of play off of cover, know when to push, when to create or reduce distance. But if you are going to get in a close range fight, you want to barrel stuff them. Use your ability to change directions quickly with your hip fire, whereas they might struggle in those ultra close range fights. Now I'm gonna give you guys 3 very basic movement techniques, and this is for any player, no matter what your input, that you can use. The first and most basic that you need to learn is gonna be the aim slide. And so all we're gonna do is we're gonna sprint, slide, and start to aim. So let's say I think there might be a player down here, is I wanna make sure I start the slide and I'm aiming before I come into the doorway, and I'm already centering my aim towards that direction. Versus if I were to just run in here, stop, and then bring my aim, this is very inefficient, and I'm gonna be taking shots before I've even gotten in here and located the enemy. Now you can do this one other way, and you can do a G slide where you jump into the slide. And so literally all you're gonna do for that is you're going to sprint, jump, slide, and then aim. So you're going to jump and press your slide button while you're in the air. Even if you hit it well before you hit the ground, you're going to go into that slide. And then again, you combine that with the pre-aiming and good centering, and it can be a very strong movement at close to mid-range. And then lastly is gonna be the kind of that sliding drop shot, which I already showed you guys. So this is where you slide and then you're gonna tap. I kind of did that a little bit wrong there, but you're gonna slide and then tap your prone button. Again, I'm doing this wrong because I'm trying to talk. Slide, prone, and this can be useful for suddenly stopping directions, or you generally want to try to drop shot when somebody is very close to you. So let's say I'm running around a corner, I have no idea there's a guy here, and let's say he's just in this corner. I could bam, oh, drop shot right under him. And because I'm suddenly changing angles like that, he has to then correct his aim and I can hopefully win that fight. But you do not want to drop shot when somebody's really far away. So if somebody's way over here, doing this is completely useless and they're just gonna hit headshots and kill you faster. Now I made a few comments around centering, but as a mouse and keyboard player, I want you guys to hyper fixate on centering. So centering is where you are keeping that center dot at chest level of where enemies would likely be, and you're going to have it where people would likely come from. So as an example, let's say I am coming around this corner, my center dot is always gonna be kind of center of the hallway at chest level. So if there's a player here, I can flick and adjust from there. Or okay, let's say I'm moving forward, okay, nobody's in front of me, but I have this leftward corner here, then I'm gonna slide and I'm gonna center right kind of in the center of the doorway where an enemy is most likely to be. Okay, we come out here and we kind of clear our right. So now I've cleared my right, now I can clear my left. And again, I center my aim. That way, if somebody is there, I have smaller adjustments to make and I don't have to make a huge big adjustment with my aim. All right, so lastly, we're gonna talk about aim training. And I will say, if you are serious about wanting to improve your skill level in Call of Duty, aim is almost always one of the biggest things that we need to focus on. Of course, there's things like movement and decision-making, the mental side of things, which I have some other videos on the channel if you wanna check those out. But aim is usually what separates a good mouse and keyboard player from a controller player. And if you want to compete against those controller players in Call of Duty, we need to have exceptionally good aim for a mouse and keyboard player. So this is Aimlabs. This is a free game that you can download on Steam. If you are a console player who is playing with mouse and keyboard, I'm sorry, this isn't available. I think there are some console aim trainers, but Aimlab does not work. So I have a few playlists and you can search for these. You can just search TCaptainX Warzone playlist. This is one that I love doing. You can go through all of these just once as a warm-up, or if you're looking to really kind of spend time in practice, go through each scenario 2 to 3 times. This is very heavily focused on tracking. And so tracking is going to be far more important in a game like Call of Duty or Apex Legends rather than flicking. Yes, flicking is very important, but most mouse keyboard players tend to be pretty decent at flicking and struggle with tracking compared to aim assist. So all of these are very tracking focused. Whereas then we kind of get to the end, and just at the end, we have a little bit more of kind of like flicking or target switching type tasks. And so if for some reason this isn't loading, you also can make and copy this exact playlist yourself or search up these individual tasks. Now, another one I would also recommend is Strafe's Warzone routine. He has a few, but all of his are amazing playlists for Aimlab. As far as practicing goes and whatnot, I would generally just recommend, if it's great to maybe do 5 to 10 minutes as a daily warm-up before you play. And then if you're really dedicated, spending 15 to 20 minutes once, maybe twice a day would be awesome as well. But ultimately, just getting in play time is also incredibly important. So, people like Metaphor, for example, I don't think he aim trains at all. I think he kind of is against it, but he plays the game a ton. So he's getting a lot of reps in game. If you want to get more of a just in-game actual Call of Duty warm-up, if you own the multiplayer, you can create a private match with bots. And this is a great way to get some quick warm-ups in before you start playing. So under multiplayer, hit find a match and then hit create, find a match, or create a match in custom. We're gonna go to the game setup and we're gonna go to free for all. For the map, go all the way to the left, and I like Babylon a lot. And then for the game rules here, you can turn the time limit and score limit up to however you see fit. For the health, go to 250. Warzone is 300, but the damages for multiplayer is different. So 250 is actually closer to kind of a Warzone TTK, but you can go all the way up to 300. It'll just make you track a little bit more. Health regen, I normally turn up to fast. You can turn the radar on if you would like. And then for gameplay, I normally just turn the score streaks off. And then behind my webcam over here, you're gonna hit the plus button and you're going to add bots. Normally I just do recruit. In Black Ops 6, the recruit bots are like way better than the old recruit bots were. Regular bots, they move a lot more and you'll have to track them more, but they will shoot you and kill you a lot faster. So you kind of got to pick your poison there. And then normally I just run like a double SMG loadout, but you can also do something like an AR and an SMG. You can put snipers on, whatever. I do recommend putting scavenger on those so that you can reload your ammo easier. And yeah, so normally when I'm going to play mouse and key for that day, I will just go in here and I'll just kill like 20 to 50 bots, 5 to 10 minutes at most, and just do this as kind of a quick warm up. And of course, while you're doing this, you can work on your movement, your whatever it is that you're trying to do, and just kind of as an overall practice session. Especially if you have made recent settings changes, this is great for kind of getting used to new keybinds, new settings, all that. Honestly, I think the best way to really kind of hone in against decent, more real players is actually just playing Plunder and going to a hot area like a superstore, hospital, storage town, whichever's kind of the hot area on that map, and just getting a bunch of practice and reps in that way. Also, you're gonna level your guns this way, so that's beneficial there too. Otherwise, Warzone, BR casual is not bad, but the bots are like super body, and then there sometimes are higher skill players in there that are trying to camo grind and stuff, so that can be a little bit tricky. Resurgence, you're always gonna get more reps in and more close range fights in if you're trying to work on that. Like for example, if you're trying to get better at close range fights for ranked, playing Resurgence could be a great warm up as well before you go into BR or ranked. But at the end of the day, I'll also say just like more playtime, nothing beats just more playtime and more practice. So if you're serious about it, you got to put in, you got to recognize what you are struggling at and then kind of make adjustments from there. If you are making settings changes, please give yourself at least 1 to 2 weeks before you change again. So I know a lot of people, they kind of get in this habit where they just like constantly keep making tweaks to their sensitivity and they're never really getting better because they're not giving themselves enough time to fully adapt to that new sensitivity. So, please give yourself a while on it. Always going lower or faster does not always mean it's going to be better. All right, guys, that's gonna wrap things up. I hope this video was helpful. If you want to support me and if you need some Ghost products of yourself, so energy drinks, supplements, creatine, protein, I do have a 20% off code TCaptainX. Use at ghostlifestyle.com. Otherwise, guys, I appreciate y'all. Come check out a stream here on YouTube, and we'll see you in the next one.